Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Move, Talk, Thrive podcast. Today, I talk to Lauren Dorney, who is an occupational therapist at Baby and Beyond Therapy Hub. In this episode, Lauren shares her extensive knowledge about sensory processing and its crucial role in child development. We talk about how sensory issues can affect a child's behaviour, emotion regulation, and participation in daily life. I cannot wait for you to listen to this episode. It is full of strategies, tools, and gold nuggets on how to use the sensory system in your therapy. I hope you enjoy.
I'm Lizzy Dawson, Australian exercise physiologist.
I'm Emily Mackey, Australian speech pathologist.
And this is the Move, Talk, Thrive podcast. Lauren, I'm so excited to have you here today. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure, as always.
We have, how long have we been kind of working together now?
I was working that out this morning. I think I might have referred a client to you around December-ish, and I think I ended up meeting Katie in January, and then it all steamrolled from there into a lovely working partnership. I referred one to you yesterday.
Actually. Did you? Thank you.
We'll chat later.
Yeah. So I think, did we call you after we were working with the same client together?
I think so.
Yeah, because I was going to share that with my my ESSA, industry colleagues, just to say, you know, what we kind of did was we had a client that was working with us. We looked at what other professionals we were working with that client, and we reached out, and it kind of just has grown from there. And what I have adored is just your openness to work with us, and also what you're doing. So we started, you referred a client to us, and we were talking about that, but then you started our little PD group. So when did that actually start?
Yeah, so I started my practice almost 3 years ago. And I was there's so many little practices that I work closely with, such as your practice, which is growing by the minute. But and like Annie from Baby to Three and Little Insights. And I just thought, you know, it would be really handy, in order for us to best support our clients, for us all to actually know when to refer, especially for the younger therapists. It's you know, it's quite what's the word? Like, you get that lack of confidence in,
overwhelmed.
Should I refer? Can I call up that person? Am I going to sound stupid? Is it a stupid question? And so I thought that would be a perfect opportunity for smaller practices where there isn't a huge PD budget to do $5,000 courses, you know, a year, that we could collaborate and educate one another on topics where there's a need. And obviously for me, sensory processing, I feel, is such a huge part of everything. You know, whether it be speech, whether it be exercise physiology, physio, and working together to achieve those goals is just so much more effective. And so that's how that has come together. Every couple of months, just getting a different professional or different practice to come on board and present. And the next one is Dr. Katie, who's a pediatrician. So that's really exciting too.
That's going to be amazing. I just think it's so good for us all just to catch up and, you know, just share the highs and lows of our weeks and get a bit of PD in there. And of course, it just makes us working together that much easier, I think, when we're referring clients to one another. And
getting our teams to know one another as well, so that it's not only referring to Liz, only referring to Lauren, but the greater teams work better together as well, which I think is really important.
Yeah. And so your jam is the sensory system. Like, that's one of your specialties. And I missed your PD, which was devastating. So side note, this is like a little way of me to get to talk about it with you and
filling Liz's bucket on a Friday.
Yes.
So yeah, I really want to unpack what you know about the sensory system, how it impacts a child, and how we can kind of use the sensory system in our therapies. Because I think that just from my experience around like stimulation, it's so powerful when we're kind of armed with that information, and this is kind of your area of specialty. So tell us a little bit about, your background as an occupational therapist and your studies around the sensory system.
Yeah, so I studied in South Africa.
Mhm.
I came over 10 years ago, but graduated almost 15 years ago. That makes me sound so old. Um, but I came over, and I guess I was quite frustrated by working from a top-down approach. So I was getting all these referrals for handwriting or emotional regulation or attention, but there wasn't really that foundation of why are we seeing a handwriting problem? Why are we seeing such extreme emotional regulation difficulties? What is happening? And also, why are we seeing them so late? So why are we only picking this up when they're 5, 6, 7? And it's, I don't want to say a bigger problem, but there's so many more habitual things going on by that point. Whereas when there's a 2-year-old, and I'll reflect on a kid I saw this week. Actually, mum's a kindy teacher, and this little guy is just so busy. And I think she's been to 3 or 4 professionals, and they've all just told her there's nothing going on. It's fine. He's just a boy. And she came to see me, and she actually started crying. She was like, "You're the first person that's listened to me." And she's like, should I have him diagnosed with ADHD? And I'm like, I don't think that's, I mean, at a later stage, if we think, okay, this is still quite extreme, potentially. But this kid has had significant ear infections, moderate hearing loss. And so his vestibular system, which I'll go into in a second how that all works, and I'm passionate about listening to parents about their children. They are the experts. And as a parent now, often don't feel listened to either. Like my little guy sees an OT as well. And for the longest time, I am an OT, and I was like, no, this is what's going on. And GPs have said, no, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. So even for me, who does know better, that frustration. So yeah, getting in, my passion is early intervention.
Yep.
Prior to starting kindy, prior to starting school, when you pick up things with your child, like a child that never sleeps, or a child that only sleeps in the car, or a child that misses milestones, or just the other one that I get often is, oh, they're just a lazy child. That is not a thing. There's a reason why it may look like that's the reason, or it may look like they're a lazy child, but why are they not wanting to move? That's not an innate thing.
Yeah.
Children should want to move and knock the whatever it is off the table and try and get there and have that motivation. And if we're not seeing that, why are we not seeing that?
Yeah. And also the other end of the spectrum, right? Like if they're, just a boy and they're going wild all the time, why are they doing that?
Yeah. And so what is happening at that sensory level? And when I do an assessment on a little person, I'll have an hour with a parent first, doing a case history.
Yeah.
So what did sleep look like? What do they like at the park? Do they love climbing, but they hate swinging? What are they like in social situations? What are they like in the car? What were they like in the car when it was rear facing? How did they? What did they like with tummy time? What were they like on their back with nappy changes? All of those sorts of things give us more information into those sensory systems. And then we will do a sensory profile. So a sensory profile, you can do a sensory profile or a sensory processing measure. Two different companies, but both of those assessments look at sensory modulation.
Yep.
And so those questionnaires I will typically do, as I say, with the parent. So you put in the scores, and Pearson or WPS give you a score.
Yep.
Those scores are not enough. So anyone can do the questionnaire, and I've seen loads of reports where you just generate the report that Pearson's given you. Or each of those systems then needs to go, when the little person comes in, each of those systems then need to be assessed and addressed and looked at as to why that's happening.
Each of those systems being the auditory.
Yeah. So auditory, visual, taste, smell, and then the ones we really hone in on are the tactile system, the proprioceptive system, and the vestibular system. Yep. There's also the interoceptive system, which I'll just quickly hone in on, because that one's probably the one we know more about it now, but it's probably historically the one that we know the least about. But that's more about those automatic body functions. So I need the toilet, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty. But the ones we would look probably the most at would be the visual system, the tactile system, the proprioceptive system, and the vestibular system.
Yep. So you do the sensory profiling first, you get those scores, and then you'll do further assessments on those systems or based on the scoring.
Yeah. So we'll have a look at, because you'll often get a parent that'll say, oh, my child's gross motor skills are amazing, but their fine motor skills aren't great. And I always have a bit of a question mark there, because they should be sort of on par. Not necessarily that every child that has good fine motor skills is going to be a top athlete, but they should be sort of on par with one another. And then when they come in, you'll have a look, and it'll be you'll get them to throw and catch the ball, and they won't actually have any of those postural background movements where they can stabilize their body and throw the ball, and it's the whole body throwing the ball. And that may look like good gross motor skills, and those are the things they like, but actually they're unable to grade that force. And so you'll then ask more around, okay, what do they like, when they were 2 and they were reading books? Were they the child that was always breaking the book? And I'll be like, yeah. Would you have let them hold a baby chicken or an egg when they were 2?
Yeah.
And the answer would generally be no, because they are unable to grade that force at that point. Yeah. And so those are the sorts of things we'd look at. And then once we've sort of hypothesized all of those results, we put them into different categories. So we'll generally have our sensitive kiddos or bubs. And this is a Meg Fora. She's a South African occupational therapist working in the UK. She has about 6 or 7, maybe 8 books and podcasts and all sorts, but she's
What's her
amazing.
Name,
Meg Fora. She's a guru. And she's basically so based on those forms, she's basically classified babies into 4 different categories. One of them being sensitive. So she refers to them as the babies that make us feel like failures as parents, because everything is just really tricky. Nappy changes, moving from one thing to the next, breastfeeding, moving from breastfeeding to a different bottle, a change in the bottle, or they can't just have the same dummy. It's got to be or a different dummy. Sorry, it's got to be exactly the same dummy. Yeah. So everything's quite challenging.
Yeah, like intense preferences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Car trips are challenging, etc. Then we get us, and they act in accordance with their sensory profile. So they have a low tolerance or a small bucket, and their bucket gets filled quite quickly. So you dress them, you change their nappy, and then they've reached their threshold.
Yeah.
So they work in accordance with their sensory profile.
Yeah.
Then we get our slow to warm babies. So they're more easily upset, and they don't sort of cope well with new places, but with a little bit of time they'll warm up and they'll still engage, whereas our sensitive babies generally just avoid everything. So our slow to warm up bubs act to counteract their profile, if that makes sense. So
Yep.
they'll act their profile for a little bit, and then they will go against that profile. We've then got our bigger buckets. So we've then got our kids that have a higher neurological threshold. And so for them, their cups or their buckets are a bit bigger, and they can take more on. So on the extreme side of that, we have our settled babies, and they are the ones that make parents have another one really quickly because they are just the dream baby. They sleep well, they feed well, they transition well, nothing's a drama. They are also often a slight bit slower on their milestones because the world can just really pass them by.
Yep.
So when that's extreme and there's an 18-month or a 17-month that's not walking.
Are these the lazy babies?
Yeah, these are the lazy babies. And so when this is happening and by 17 months they not walk, and I know like the norm says 12 to or 9 to 18 months, 10 to 18 months. But when there's no interest in moving and no other reason why, so there's no other neurological condition why this should be, I'm super concerned because, as I said before, like a lazy baby shouldn't be, they should want to grab.
Yeah.
But they just take in all this information. So visual, they're not really that distracted by bright lights or bright things or bright toys. The world just kind of passes them by and they're just happy to kind of be there, be present. Then we have our social butterflies. Sorry, so our settled baby act in accordance with their profile. Their buckets are huge. They just take it all in and act in accordance. Then we've got our social butterflies. And they are our go, 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 go babies. The world is more interesting. We want more flavors in our food. We want more colors, more texture, more. We move, we go. They're exhausting.
Yeah. I think I am one of them.
I've got one. I am one of them and I have one of them.
Same.
And they act in opposition to their sensory profiles. And so it's all about, from a therapeutic point of view, I suppose my concerns are the only sensory processing difficulties are not only not liking messy play, covering your ears. Those are the two common ones we all know, and picky eating. But really it's about looking beyond, like, at all of the senses and how they're all working together. Because our sensory processing, like our central nervous system, is basically the traffic cop that's directing the flow of traffic. And when that's not going right or not flowing correctly, there's a traffic jam. And for a lot of our little people, that is what's happening. It's a disorganized flow of traffic. And so you're sitting on the Bruce Highway on a Friday afternoon on the way to Noosa, and that's what it looks like for a lot of them. And so, you'll put a shirt on them and you can't understand why they're losing it, but to them it feels like they're wearing a cactus on their back, So for you and I, you'll put a shirt on, you'll notice it for a second maybe, and you'll habituate it and you won't think about it for the rest of the day unless there's something particularly irritating about it. But for some of our kids that have the smaller buckets, the sensitive little people, all of these that we're bombarded with these senses all day, the bird chirping outside, your shirt, sitting, balance, etc. And then we see those cups explode when they've reached their threshold, which is usually, could be at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And so, what we then do from a therapeutic point of view is we work out what the best fit is for them in terms of environment. And it's then about integrating those senses. So we can provide strategies, and we do. So like the strategies would be more about the environment, like what can we provide in that little person's environment? How can we adapt? How can we change the clothing? How can we add a sensory diet and some movement into their day? But we also, from a therapy point of view, we also need to get them in and work on those systems together. So working on the vestibular, the proprioceptive, and the tactile system together. So whether that's, being on a swing and they've got to posturally hold themselves up and lean down and get the ball and throw it into the poop or whatever it is. But really honing in on all of those systems working together.
Yeah, right. Love it. It's so
Yeah.
complex, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it really is. And so there's a addition, like we have a little bit of it in undergrad, but then there's an additional course which is intense.
That's what you did, right?
That's what I did, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is really interesting how they all, well, I think it's interesting anyway, how they all work together and impact on everything.
Exactly.
Everything in this little person's day. So, if our sensitive little people, they don't want to try new foods. They don't want to change in routine. They don't want to drive in the car. It's scary. Some of them are quite gravitationally insecure. So your first relationship is with gravity, that they say. So if that's not secure, how do we then build on building relationships with other people? How do we feel safe in climbing and swinging and engaging? And so one of my other big questions to parents is, when you look at Story Park or one of the apps that the kindies and daycares have, what is your child doing? Like, are they participating, or are they always sitting by themselves? That's always one of my first questions to parents as well. What does that participation look like? Because not all sensory preferences are necessarily a problem. We're not all going to be amazing at everything, and that's okay. That's okay to fall within average or slightly below average, slightly above average. But when it's impacting on daily life and participation, that's when it becomes concerning. When it's impacting significantly on sleep and no one's getting any sleep, sleep is not a luxury. It's a necessity.
Yeah, absolutely.
For them and for us. We know what we feel like when we haven't slept, and it's no different for them. And play is their job, and learning through play is how they learn.
Yeah. And I was talking to someone this week. It was Flip, my son's speechy, and I said, "Oh, his resilience is quite low." And she said, "How is his sleep?" And we need to do a blood test on irons because he's also a fussy eater. I'm just sitting here going, "Okay, I need to book both my kids in to see you." But she said, when resilience is low, I generally want to know how fatigued the child is, and what their blood work is like, because resilient, like, if you're like, we know if we have one shocking night's sleep, our resilience is low. Like, I'll cry at something that doesn't really warrant me to
my
cry.
coffee gets spilt or something.
Yes. I remember you sending me the photo of your dropping your coffee the other day. But and I think I've just felt like that was such a good point that sometimes we just overlook. Like, you can just think, my child has got no resilience. Not speaking on my thoughts here. That's not what I think all the time. But we need to look at the underlying things that are happening. And I think asking about sleep and diet is really important. Even I was talking to my team about it in our assessments, because we also do a telephone consult with the parents before our initial face-to-face with the kids to get this information. I said, I want you asking about sleep and diet, because it just gives us a much better picture of what's going on with that child, and if it's improving throughout the intervention that we're providing as well. And
if there's a lack of an iron deficiency or a deficiency in something, we can work until we blue in the face. It's not going to fix it until there is an iron infusion or whatever that looks like, iron supplements or and so that history is just really important, because otherwise we could be working on the same thing and it may look like something else, but actually is there an underlying. And specifically with our picky eaters, we know for a fact that a lot of them are bland diet. They're not taking in the red meats and all the iron rich foods, and so they are at higher risk of deficiencies and then
Yeah.
fatigue and resilience, etc. A lack of resilience, low
Yeah.
resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. And so would you do sensory profiling on all the kids that come into Baby and Beyond?
So that won't always be the reason for referral. So
Mhm.
I follow occupational therapist called Kerry Everts. She's on the Gold Coast, and she has a company called Sense Up, and basically she trains OTs, and I think at the moment it's only for OTs. But she's developed I'll send it to you actually, a pyramid, a wall pyramid called the Sense Up model. And
Oh, you've
basically
talked about this before.
at the top of the pyramid will be generally the reason for referral. So I suppose the top referrals I'll get in kindy preppies would be can't sit still, emotional regulation difficulties, and handwriting difficulties. In my littlies, it'll be more feeding, sleep, ADHD type,
Mhm.
looking like an ADHD diagnosis. And so those will be at the top of that pyramid. And then we kind of unpack down below what that looks like. So is it a visual motor issue? Is it a visual motor issue stemming from a vestibular postural difficulty? So our vestibular system generates our muscle tone. If
Yep.
we don't have adequate muscle tone, fine motor skills, gross motor skills. So I suppose the other important thing to note is that we have 3 classifications of sensory processing difficulties, one of which is sensory modulation. So those are our over responders or under responders, so our big or little buckets.
Yep.
But we've then also got sensory discrimination as well. So that is, can they feel the difference between hot and cold? Can they feel the difference, in water between a hard ball and a soft ball? And then what does that look like functionally? Those children generally can't do their buttons because once they can't rely on their visual system, that's really tricky. And then we've got sensory-based motor disorders, so more our praxis type of difficulties as well. And so I suppose to answer your question, yes, we'd always, that wouldn't necessarily be the reason for referral, but we'd almost always look at that whole system because it impacts so much it impacts on everything else.
Yeah, and we're all somewhere on the spectrum, aren't we? Like it's not it might not be an issue, but we're still going to have preferences. Like I know that I've got preferences myself, so it's going to influence how we respond to therapy, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we do all have, like, I know for a fact when I go, auditory processing is quite challenging for me. And when I go out to a really loud restaurant with poor acoustics,
Yeah.
I just really struggle to follow a conversation.
Yeah.
And I lip read a lot. So like at the end of the night, my visual system is so fatigued because it's compensating for my auditory system. And I'm, functioning for the most part quite well as a human. But yeah, for a lot of our little people, when it's just an absolute traffic jam, you really do need to unpack at what level that's happening. Why is handwriting so tricky? Why are we avoiding gross motor activities? Why are we having 20 meltdowns a day at 5 or 6? And from an emotional regulation point, what is happening there? Why are we 6 and we still not sleeping through, or we waking up 4 or 5 times a night? What is happening at each of those levels that's affecting like a vicious cycle, really?
Yeah. Absolutely. And so from, I guess, like a therapy perspective, how can we, if we're not OTs, because I feel like the sensory system is very much like in OT, what's it called? Scope.
Territory.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I definitely, we kind of intertwine it and get as much information at Kids Heart Pilates. But what are the things that, exercise physiologists, physios, speechies, psychs, what are the things and educators and parents, what are the strategies or things that we should be finding out that are going to influence our therapy or, intervention with kids?
I think definitely finding out who is on the team.
Yeah.
having a chat to your team, because we, without even yet, yes, it may very well be an OT historically scope, but we're all working on the sensory systems all of the time. You're doing movement, that's working on vestibular, probe, tactile. You're using music, that's working on auditory. So, you know, through everything we're doing, we're all using it anyway, I suppose. I suppose when you're getting a case history, I'd definitely be asking more of those questions around sleep. Meltdowns. How many meltdowns are we having? What are their functional skills looking? What do their functional skills look like? Are they able? And obviously, age appropriate. I'm not expecting a 2-year-old to do their shoelaces, but you know, is your 4 to 5-year-old able to dress themselves for and there will be days where my 4-year-old this morning is like, "Mommy, can you just dress me?" And that will happen, and that's okay. They're still little people, but for the most part, are they able to put on their shoes? It doesn't have to always be accurate. The shirt can be back to front. What do those functional skills look like? Sorry. Obviously you guys hone hugely on this, but what do their gross motor skills look like? Are they using their whole body? Or are they actually able to isolate? And then I suppose a conversation around what do their fine motor skills look like? And that would generally be where, as I said, we'd get the referral. But working, I don't know, I haven't done a joint session with an EP before, but it would be a good, I do joint sessions a lot with speechies.
Oh, cool.
Trying to incorporate movement and then, movement and then getting more vocalizations. But yeah, I think there's definitely room for that.
Yeah. What do your joint sessions with a speechy look like?
So we generally have them in a swing. So we're working on those postural vestibular systems. And then in between each of the reps or whatever, they'll bring in a language speech component. It works well for our really littlies that are non-verbal. That movement stimulates language. Haven't done many with physios as yet, but yeah, it's an area we need to investigate, look into.
That. Yeah, park that idea. I feel like we need to chat more about that. Because I think that's great, right? Because that also, if you can get those therapies together, all the systems are working together, so you're going to take advantage of that, and it's time effective for the family as well, right? And the child from an energy perspective.
Absolutely.
And one thing I like to do is I like to find out as much as I can about if they've had sensory profiling done, which some have not when they come to us. Usually when we get clients as an exercise physiologist, they're already seeing OT and speechy. We're kind of like we're further down the road, but I like to have the information or whatever information they've got on the sensory system and sensory profiling and sensory preferences, so we can set up that face-to-face for success, basically set the child up for success. You would refer to the environment before. What are some things that if mum's saying, oh, little Johnny doesn't like the car and he's having lots of outbursts and he covers his ears with, when there's loud noises, what can we be doing in the environment, or what are some kind of like just key pieces from that sensory profiling for setting up the environment?
I think the biggest piece for us as therapists, but also giving that knowledge to parents, is our therapeutic use of self. So how calm are we in that situation?
Yep, love it.
What is our tone of voice doing?
Yep.
What is the external environment? What does it sound like? What does it look like? Is it visually overstimulating? I go into some kindies sometimes and I'm just like, oh, I feel overwhelmed because it's so visually cluttered and loud. And so I can imagine what my little people who do have sensory difficulties must feel like.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think isn't given enough credit is gross motor skills, and you love this one, but I go into so many kindies and there's no real opportunity for them to climb, to swing from a risk perspective. And those are our regulating systems. So we know what we feel like when we exercise.
Yep.
And it's no different for our little people. So you always feel better when you've gone for a walk or you've gone and done something active. And so many of these environments are not set up with opportunity for them to climb and move.
Yeah.
So, and it doesn't always have to be a indoor play area. Go to the park. We have amazing parks. Instead of taking them to an overwhelming area, go to a park before kindy. If car rides are particularly tricky, is there opportunity, and this is not always possible, so it's very individualized, definitely wouldn't be possible for me. Is there opportunity to walk to kindy? Getting some of that proprioceptive and vestibular input. You're not going in the car, which is another piece that's going into filling your bucket. I've got a little girl that actually changed schools so that she could walk, or mum chose the school, sorry, based on the fact that the car was so challenging for her from a tactile perspective because the straps and a vestibular perspective. And mum actually chose a school that they could walk to, which has been life-changing for her.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another thing like just that popped into my head because we're mobile. So we go out to people's homes and we go into centers, which could be like there's an advantage to that, isn't that? They're like not just from a time perspective, but from a fact that if those car rides are difficult. So that's another like really important piece, isn't it? To understand. I love the co-regulation piece as well. Like if we're kind of grounded and calm, and when I quite often go into daycare centers, the educators are, and like totally warranted.
Yeah.
But they're done
frazzled
and they're yelling and they're moving furniture. And I'm just sitting there going, oh my gosh, this is so loud and crazy. So the poor little littlies are, struggling with that.
And even using like different tempos of music to set the scene in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So if you walk in and you can see it's been a manic, chaotic day, we're not going to put fast, loud, crazy music on. We're going to go more for like big, slow stomps like elephants or something like that. But yeah, I don't typically, I mean, I have goals for every session, obviously. But it's very much child-led and dependent on what that child looks like when they come into therapy. So I might have a plan, but it doesn't always go to plan based on their level of arousal, because if their cup is already full or their bucket is already full by the time they get to therapy, we need to then work to take some of those stones out of their bucket or sensory input out of their bucket to try and get them into a calm, alert state where they can learn and focus and engage.
Yeah. And so from a when I'm thinking about other therapists that, a little bit different to us, so they're not moving. So like speechies generally don't have a lot of movement in their sessions, and psychs creating movement opportunities for their spaces as well, do you think?
Yeah, so for a lot of, I generally call all of my speechies that, like all of the co-treat clients with me, because I always want to know how I can incorporate whatever they're doing in their sessions into my sessions. So we're all consistent across the board in terms of communication, how they're accessing communication. But conversely, I'll also give that for a child that absolutely cannot sustain their posture and can't sit, I'll incorporate, I'll get them to get one of those little trampolines or peanut balls where they can bounce in between, in between practicing what their speech,
whatever
feeding
it is
they're working on.
Same sort of
feeding too, yeah. And so having a good relationship with the people you refer to is key in being able to pick up the phone and go, hey, little Johnny, he needs 5 bounces, or he needs a bit of work on his tummy, or avoid tactile play because he works in opposition to his profile. So he
Yeah.
loves the tactile play, but then dysregulates himself.
Yeah.
And just chatting through what the profile looks like for that child. And I also have a sensory diet for the parents at home and for kindies.
Yeah.
And so incorporating, and it's got nothing to do with an actual diet in the sense that we know, but it's more around what little bits of movement can we incorporate, movement and not just movement, sorry, tactile input, etc.
Yes.
Can we incorporate into that child's day at a just right level to keep them in that calm, alert state?
Yeah.
And that could look like, I often alter if they come to me and sleep is a major concern. We look at sleep routines, like what are we doing from 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Is there screen time after 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Because that generally they visually overstimulated, but
Yeah.
it's not stimulating any of those systems that are
Mm.
calming and bring down that level of arousal.
Mm.
So looking at that, what can we incorporate before bed? Lots of proprioceptive input, pulling, pushing, and I can always see parents' eyes as I say, "Oh, before bed, I'd like you to do lots of like rough and tumble play and big bear hugs," and I can see them going, "Oh, that's what my husband always does," and I'm always like, "You're going to rile them up," and 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 then they tried it, and this is obviously for not every child, but yeah, and then like, oh, it worked.
Yeah.
So yeah, keeping things calm, but you think that putting on a 20-minute TV show is calming, but actually it's the opposite. And
Yeah.
I can see it with my children too.
Yep. Same. Absolutely. So, how can what would be your advice to, I mean, any health professional of any discipline to work like to collaborate and work together? Because obviously the outcomes for kids are going to be so much better if we're having those conversations. What's your kind of advice to those maybe more junior professionals coming out in terms of collaborating with other health disciplines?
I said be confident in asking questions.
Mm.
I love it when other professionals send me a message about one of my clients because I'm like, yay, we have collaboration. And it's very rare, once, twice in my career, that I haven't had a response from whoever I've contacted.
Mhm.
We're a nurturing, caring profession. We want to help, often to the detriment of ourselves. We want to help everyone
Yeah.
and support our little people. And so picking up the phone or sending an email if the phone is scary, reporting what you're seeing, because that is,
Mm.
I'd love to know what it looks like in your session versus my
Yeah.
session. I've had speechies contact me going, oh, they're just so calm in my session. And I'm like, well, they're not in mine. and vice versa. Like
Yeah.
how can I tweak my sessions? How can you tweak your sessions? I think it comes down to communication.
Yeah.
And I think stakeholder meetings are so important
Mhm.
for collaborating and getting the best outcome for
Yeah.
our little
What sort of
people.
frequency do you think we need to be having those?
Ideally, once a term.
Yeah.
Not always possible though. So I'd say probably twice a year as a more
Yeah.
realistic option. Obviously, that is time,
Yeah.
but it is just so important. And also being confident in telling the parents why you need to do it,
Yeah.
because it is money, obviously.
Yep.
And but the outcomes are just so much better if we're all working on the same goals or contributing to the
Absolutely.
same goals.
Yeah. And I say to my team, what we do, I say two things. One, use downtime and holidays to reach out to the other health professionals. You might not get a response, but if you've got time, then because we tend to be a little bit quieter in the school holidays. So use that time to do those reach outs, even if you're just planning for a time midterm or the frequency or whatever. And two, that collaboration can then feed into our reporting, which is really important for securing funding. What are your kind of tips there on, both reporting and making sure that we're reporting effectively to secure more funding or the same funding and whatnot?
It's a great question because I feel like that goalpost keeps moving at the
I
moment.
know.
So I would have probably had a different answer 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I think it is imperative at the time of NDIS review, etc., and especially for my little ones with significant conditions that have big plans and AT and all of that. It is imperative that everyone has a chat around, okay, what does this child need in terms of therapy time, but also, Liz, what are you working on? What are your goals? What are my goals? Yes, we're all working towards a bigger goal, but we can't all be working on exactly the same thing because they're going to see it as a duplication of services.
Exactly.
And so chatting about who's actually working on what, and also then allocating time. And I think the biggest mistake people make is they allocate, say, weekly OT for 52 weeks, weekly speech for 52 weeks, weekly physio for 52 weeks, weekly EP for 52 weeks, and then whatever else they're doing, gymnastics. It's also about what is sustainable for that child. I would be, so my son does OT, tennis, starting gymnastics, and I'm like, whoa, this is enough.
Yeah.
How do I, parents work. So what is the family, what is achievable for the family?
Yep.
Is that one mobile session a month? Is that two mobile? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And then also just collaborating on, like intensives is another one where I've had, one discipline doing 5 hours a week and then they can't make any other disciplines. And so just effectively communicating, that's a big day for a little person. That's a big day for me.
Totally.
Doing an hour, like 2 hours of therapy a day. So it is really important that we're talking.
And aligning on that. Yeah, for sure. Oh, thank you so much. You have been so incredibly generous with your wealth of knowledge, and just, I think I love your the way that you're collaborating with us and creating a nice little hub so that we're all learning off each other, and just really nice community of pediatric health professionals. So I'm very, very grateful for that. Where can people reach you if they've got any further questions or any parents want to speak to you? Where's the best place to get in touch?
The best place would be our website. So it's www.bbth.com.au, and then just send an inquiry through there.
Awesome.
And I'll get back to you in 24 to 48 hours, hopefully. Instagram is another option. I'm always happy to answer questions over there. I also get a few referrals through there as well.
Oh, fab. You've got great Instagram. I love it.
Yeah, it needs a bit of love at the moment. And
Awesome. Well, I am sure you will get lots of people reaching out because you're just so generous with your knowledge, and I love working with you. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Likewise. Let the relationship continue.
Fab. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Oh my goodness, what a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful for Lauren's friendship and support as a pediatric professional in Brisbane. It has been invaluable, and I'm so grateful that she was so generous with her knowledge and experience with all of you. Now, don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, to please subscribe, review, and share all these tools and strategies with your community so that we can together help children be their best selves.